Hi guys, welcome back. Now in the previous videos, we already discussed the concept of resource allocation, and I told you guys that we're going to be understanding about resource allocation by answering the three fundamental questions in great detail. So in this video, we're going to learn the three fundamental questions that economic agents like households, consumers, firms, and government needs to answer, right, in order to best manage our scarce resources. Now, before moving on, guys, if you're new to my channel or you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to my channel and share the channel with as many people as you can so that others may also know that there's content out there that is going to benefit them. Now, guys, moving forward, when we talk about what to produce, how to produce, for whom to produce, we say that these are three basic economic questions because resources are scarce, right? But human wants are unlimited. So every economy must answer these three fundamental questions. So when we talk about the first question, what to produce, this question, remember, deals with the choice of goods and services that need to be produced, right? Or let's say, if you're talking about a firm, then what goods should firms produce, or what goods should consumers consume, or let's say, what goods should governments sort of produce and sell in the economy, as in terms of should they allocate more to infrastructure or healthcare, right? And since our resources, land, labor, capital, enterprise, are limited, so producing one good means sacrificing another. So for the question what to produce, opportunity cost is very, very central here, right? For instance, a government might decide for instance, government's decision could be like, should Pakistan sorry should Pakistan invest more in defense, like fighter jets or submarines, or more in education or healthcare? Because the thing is that producing more weapons means fewer schools or hospitals, right? A firm might decide that a smartphone, like if it's a smartphone company, it might decide whether we should produce more, flagship phones, or focus more on, budget models, depending on what the consumer demand is, right? And individuals like me and you might decide, let's say, an individual might decide, like me and you, let's for example take the case of a farmer. So a farmer may decide whether to use his land to, I don't know, grow wheat or cotton, right? And the choice, by the way, when we say that what to produce, this choice depends on consumer demand, what the consumer demand is. So it depends on consumer demand. It also depends upon what the government priorities are at that time. So the government would focus on producing what its priorities are, right? And it would depend upon whether we have those resources available or not. So it depends upon resource availability, the government's or state's priorities, and the consumer demand. Now, how to produce is basically related to what methods of production are we going to use, right? So are we going to, so for instance, let's say if we talk about countries like Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. Now these countries are labor abundant countries. They have a lot of labor, right? So the labor abundant countries, like, so that is why we see that, in our textile factories, we are often using labor intensive methods. We have more workers, less machinery. That's what labor intensive means. And the reason is that labor is cheap and abundant here in these countries. But on the other hand, countries like Japan and Germany, where these countries are more capital abundant countries, right? So you see that there's more automobile production which is very highly automated. We very rely on robots and advanced machinery, right? But sometimes when you say how to produce, the production could be environmentally conscious as well. So environmental conscious production could exist in some countries and within some firms, where we could say that should electricity be produced using, let's say, coal, which is actually cheaper but it's very environmentally polluting, or should we use renewable resources like solar and wind? Actually, they are very costly, but then they are more sustainable environmental wise, right? So the choice about how to produce, guys, involves considering the efficiency, what is more efficient, whether machinery or labor. It depends upon the costs involved. It depends upon what technology is available and what do we have. And it depends also upon the sustainability. And we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about considering the environment into account, right? Because climate change is a big problem nowadays, right? It's also the third question when we talk about for whom to produce. This relates to the, now this this you need to understand. This relates to the distribution of the goods and services that will be produced in society. Who gets access to what? So who will get the access to what is being produced? And this answer, the answer that who gets access to what is produced depends upon the economic system. You need to understand. Depends upon the economic systems, right? So I mean, you have three different sort of allocation mechanisms in place, right? You have three different sort of economies like market economy, planned economy, or mixed economies, right? So, market economy, a perfect example is, let's say, the USA. So, economies like market economies like USA would so for in market economies, guys, goods go to those who can actually afford them based on the incomes and wealth. So for instance, luxury cars like Ferrari are only for high income groups. So again, Ferrari goes to high income people only, right? And planned economies such as, let's say, North Korea, so here the government would decide the distribution of the goods often, and here the distribution is not based on who has more income or wealth, but it is based on needs or priorities which the government normatively assesses, right? So the government might say, okay, fine, that we have this much food and we have this much housing, so this much housing goes to these people and this much housing goes to those, and this much food goes to this and that. So the government rations the food and housing. It distributes, basically. Rationing means distributes the food and housing accordingly based on needs and priorities. And let's say mixed economies like Pakistan would have a combination of both the the government deciding distribution and also the markets, the free markets, deciding distribution based on who can afford them, where you can say that basic needs like healthcare, education, vaccine may be provided by the government, so that everyone gets a fair chance, while luxury goods could be allocated through the market. So you see, the distribution question, when you're talking about for whom to produce, you're talking about the distribution of these goods. So the distribution question is actually about equity versus efficiency. Equity versus efficiency. And what I mean is that should goods be distributed equally or according to the ability to pay? And I mean, equally, when we're saying goods should be distributed equally, talking about equity here, we have the equity concern in mind, but based on according to the ability to pay is more concerned with the efficiency principle. Okay, fine. You know what? We are allocating our goods efficiently because we are producing goods that are mostly demanded by consumers who can actually afford to pay. So when you talk about distribution of goods, you need to understand this. And guys, remember that the more equity, better if the distribution is based on equity, which means that these goods are not only for the rich or based on the ability to pay, then the overall incomes and wealth distribution in the economy would be more equal. While if goods are produced based on who pays for them and who can afford to pay for them, and only the rich would get then, right? And the poor would be left out. So the income distribution in such economies and countries is unequal. So, guys, to sum it up, if I were to give a very quick sort of way to remember this, that you can think of a society that is running a restaurant with very limited ingredients, right? And if that restaurant needs to think what to produce, so it would think like, should we cook pizzas or burgers or I don't know, maybe biryani or whatever choice of goods, right? So that is what to produce. How to produce that restaurant would think like, do we hire more chefs, that is labor, or we end up buying advanced cooking machines as capital? So what methods of production it will basically use, right? Methods of production. While for whom to produce would involve the restaurant thinking like, do we serve only those who can pay for an expensive meal, or do we also provide some free meal or less costly meal to the poor, which is actually focusing on the meal being the output. It's mostly focusing on the distribution of the output, distribution of the goods, right? So every economy, be it a capitalistic economy, socialist economy, mixed economy, must answer these three type of questions. And the answer to these three type of questions, guys, remember, this is actually linked with economic systems that you will study later, which is part of your AS course. The way they answer, the way the economies and societies answer what, how, for whom to produce, determines the type of economic systems they have. It also determines the level of efficiency there would be in the country and the economy, and it would also depend, it would also tell us about the degree of equity we have in societies, the way these economies will answer these questions. would tell us or would determine the type of economic systems that exist in these societies, the level of efficiency that exists in these in markets and the economy, and the degree of equity there is in society. Right, guys? So I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, take care.